We're going to hear from Lynne Harne from the UK. She is a lesbian feminist activist, founder, member of Lesbian Rights Alliance, an organisation campaigning to stop lesbian erasure. Recently, she's been working with a small group of younger lesbians to create a website and youth project aimed at young lesbians, now known as positively-lesbian.org.
The first thing I want to say is that I'm speaking on behalf of the young lesbian feminists who created this website, but can't be public as yet because of their jobs and so on. Our motivation for creating the website very strongly was to address the attempts that have been made to disappear lesbians, really, and make us invisible. And this started with the queer movement. The queer movement was saying that in the UK, this started at the sort of end of the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s. And the queer movement said that lesbians had to call themselves queer, be open to sex with men, and worship the penis, basically. And then we had the transgender, well, really the popularization of the transgender movement through Organize, like Stonewall, and who changed same-sex attraction into gender attraction. And we had the ludicrous situation of cross-dressing men identifying as lesbians and calling their penises lady sticks. And of course now trying to, as we've seen in the previous talk, insisting that they have sex with real lesbians, material lesbians. And the other side of this was that lesbians who didn't conform to sexist stereotypes of girls and women had to call themselves men born in the wrong bodies. And we know this has caused untold harm to probably thousands of lesbian bodies, irreversible harm. And this is all coming out through detransitioner accounts and research now on detransitioners who are mainly lesbian detransitioners. In the Lesbian Rights Alliance, we did, of course, start resisting this. And there was lesbian resistance from Get the L Out, for example, in protesting at Pride marches and so on. And then there was the creation of the Lesbian Strength Marches, which used to happen in the second wave. And in terms of the Lesbian Rights Alliance, in 2018, we went to meet up with the Government Equality Office to talk about discrimination against lesbians. And this was myself and three of the young lesbians I'd met through radical feminist connections, mainly at a radical feminist conference, I think, which was about 2016, where I ran a workshop called Tomboys Not Allowed. So it was me and these three young lesbians saying to the Government Equality Office, there's discrimination, particularly against young lesbians. There are hundreds of LGBT youth groups, but there's nothing for young lesbians. There isn't a single youth group for young lesbians, and that is what is needed. And then the Equality Office turned around and said, "Oh yes, there is a lesbian youth organisation. It's called the Proud Trust." And we soon found out that the Proud Trust wasn't a lesbian organisation at all. It was a transgender organisation promoting gender identity ideology. But it had been awarded nearly £100,000 for a 3-year project to train teachers in schools. And this was supposed to be for disadvantaged lesbian and bisexual young women. What the Proud Trust did, and it's still operating today and promoting gender identity ideology, etc., is began to educate teachers into various normalizing practices. For example, it was saying that girls should accept having anal sex with boys. It was assuming that the materials that they were producing were sort of for bisexual or heterosexual children. There's nothing wrong with engaging in BDSM and kink. It said pornography was perfectly normal. Children should watch pornography because they could learn from it. This particular teaching program was aimed at children aged 11 to 12. And you can see in this slide that the most notorious thing about this, and an article was published in the Times about it, is that it's got these hands and fingers, penis, mouth. And if a child tossed the dice, there had to be a conversation about how penises were used, how hands and fingers were used. On one of the other sides, it's also got objects, the use of objects in sex and so on. And I think that this program is probably still going, even though the Minister of Education said he objected to it. So this is a type of thing that the Proud Trust and loads of other pro-trans and transgender organisations are taking into schools now. This is what children are being taught, as well as being taught that if you're a girl, that you don't like dolls and pink, you're really a boy, you can change sex very easily, and so on. When we started to set up the Positively Lesbian project, which was initially called the Labris project, we looked for funding for it because we decided we had to do it for ourselves, that we weren't going to get any help from government. We did originally apply to an organisation called Lush, which at the time were funding women-only organisations and that had funded the Lesbian Immigration Support Group. But of course we got turned down, even though they didn't tell us that we got turned down, why we got turned down, because they thought trans activists might be offended. So then what happened is that we raised funds for it through GoFundMe in 2020, when lockdown was mainly going on, and started to develop the website in 2021, and it was launched in the late summer of 2021. So what we had to counter in developing the website was, what is a lesbian, basically in terms of men calling themselves lesbian and so on. It was really important that we talked about lesbianism being about women who are emotionally and sexually attracted to other females only, and that some lesbians know that they're sex attracted at a very young age, others discover this later in life, and some call themselves bisexual before they decide they're lesbians. And it was really also important that we highlight compulsory sexuality, because many young girls and young women, although they maybe perhaps have crushes on other girls at school, feel that they've got to comply to heterosexuality. That's the only normal sexuality. So they have to comply with it. And before they've really had any experience to have relationships with other women. So we just wanted to reassure young women that it's okay to be unsure about your sexuality. But we have had, in terms of young lesbian responses to the site, we have had young lesbians contacting us saying they are still confused about their sexuality because of what they've seen on social media forums such as Reddit and Tumblr. And on Reddit, all they can see is forums which are full of what they call transbians. But on Tumblr, there are also the extreme lesbian view, if you like, is that you can't be a lesbian or even call yourself a lesbian unless you've started to know that you're a lesbian from the age of 3, for example, and you have to call yourself bisexual, and you can never be a lesbian unless you know that you're a lesbian from a very young age. And we don't, in terms of the website, that is not the message that we're promoting. We're saying that any young woman can decide to be a lesbian, even if she has had previous sexual relationships with men, and she can call herself a lesbian. Obviously, if she's sexually attracted to them, because we've also had other young lesbians saying, choosing to be a lesbian means that you have to force yourself into same-sex attraction. And of course, that's absolute rubbish. You only want to become a lesbian if you do feel attracted to other women. It's not something that's forced at all. Of course, we all know that the male gender identity movements say that sex doesn't exist, etc., and it's not a material reality. And we just wanted to reaffirm that it is a reality. It's the body you're born with. There's only 2 categories, sex categories, female and male, and there are a very small number of people with intersex conditions, but they still fall into these 2 categories. And also, to be clear, very much about what gender is, the social stereotypes, they're not stereotypes in your brain, which you're born with, so masculinity for men and femininity for women. And to really say that all women are born in the right body, basically, rather than the ideology that they have to be men because they're born in the wrong body. It was also very important to us to address all the attacks and so on from men who are pretending to be women, who are entering lesbian dating sites, and also in queer ideology being told that they must accept these men and be prepared to have sex with these men. And if you go on these, there are some specific sites which say that they are specifically aimed at lesbians, but that's not the case. We didn't find a single dating site which said that they would exclude men pretending to be women or exclude men claiming to be women. But those sites apparently don't exist. And if you're a young lesbian and you protest saying, I only want a relationship with a woman, you're likely to be thrown out of the site. So this is one example that 1 or 2 of the young lesbians in our group have used is Hinge, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily won't come across a man when they meet up. And so we put in all these guidelines about staying safe and how it's fine to be, if it's a man or you don't like the woman you're meeting up with, just to say, no, I don't want to carry on, or I don't want this to carry on. So those are the messages it's been really important for us to give. It was particularly important to us to show that there is a female, that for lesbians, relationships are about sexual relationships in particular, about giving pleasure to each other through mutable relationships. To also highlight that things like a hierarchical sexual relationship, which comes from what women have got, lesbians may have learned from gay men, is about, you know, tops and bottoms and so on. One is a person in power, and one is the person who lacks power in the sexual relationship. So those are the sorts of things that we've, you know, put on the website. And we particularly wanted to, it's not here, but we did have a picture of the clitoris and where it is and so on body issues, and now I think it was in the relationships part of it. The responses to the website, they've been overwhelmingly positive internationally, and thanking us for doing the website, and we also have been recently in touch with further education colleges and schools, girls only schools at the present time, to be asked to come and talk about being lesbian. And so that's one of the things in the future that we're going to do, and set up a group who are willing to go and talk in schools. Lesbians, probably under 40, not lesbians my age, to go and do that. And we only had one response which said they thought our site was transphobic because we should have something about how it's okay to be trans because some young women benefit from it, and obviously we're not going to do that.